And to a certain extent, I think that actually should be one of the things we talk about. One objective we have is increasing diversity. We're asking people to participate. We're not telling them to do things. We're letting people tell us what to do. And those people in charge are not the ones that actually should be making those decisions because they're not actually getting a diverse perspective. It's kind of interesting case study. All of you actually came closer. You were invited in. I wanted you closer. We don't do that in the industry. We don't actually invite people in, especially from outside. Do you see what just happened? You took action. I know. So why don't we be that in our own industry? And that's, I think, what we actually should be talking about.
Yeah, so talking about inviting people in and taking action. So the last panel was talking about the things that they're passionate about. In my day-to-day job, I'm passionate about payments. For people that are not in the payments industry, because fintech is pretty broad, that usually makes a lot of people laugh because nobody really likes to do payments. I actually love doing payments and looking at the customer experience, and I actually enjoy a lot that the company that I work for, ACI, is really in a technology space, but because it's payment and it's something that every one of us experiences on a day-to-day basis, the things that we deliver, the things that I do across Europe with our customers are things that affect day-to-day people's lives. Right, so I'm a true payment geek and I can get really excited about payments. But the other thing that I'm very passionate about is diversity. So I've been in the payments industry for 20 years, mostly on the technology side. And for many, many years, I was the only woman in the room. I've been to conferences where like 200 people, and I look around and I'm like, oh, I'm the only woman. And it's not like there aren't women, they are. And what I'm seeing over the last couple of years is that they're coming out a lot more. And so what we have done in terms of taking action is about 4 years ago, a couple of ladies got together and we kind of thought, hey, we got to do something about this, make sure that women get a voice. It's not like they're not here. Make sure that they get a voice, make sure that there is more attention for what women are contributing and the need for women to contribute. And we decided to create a network, the European Women Payments Network. It's a completely not-for-profit organization. It's driven by volunteers that dedicate their spare time. Estelle is here. She's our French country ambassador. And we're dedicated to creating a network to help women network and feel comfortable and create a voice. And in terms of taking action, right, we just decided we were going to do that and just did it. And the response to it has been great. And I think that goes for something like that, or for starting a startup, or for just getting going. Just do it is my motto. And I think we can all do that.
It's an interesting thing that there's also an order to do it when we're compelled to do it, right? When we take on the authority, we actually assume the authority. Interestingly enough, you gave it to me. Do you understand that? When I said move, you responded and you gave it to me. I don't think we actually exercise that enough. And that's one of the things that bringing more people together, having a single objective, having a unified voice, putting together something like the European Women Payments Network, putting together chapters of your own sort of localized group of compatriots that are focused on the same thing, that are interested in the same thing. And it doesn't really matter if it's a gender issue, or if it's a policy issue, or if it's a product design issue. A startup is, again, a calling, kind of an order of a collaboration together. It's when we actually take the authority for ourselves and we command that the market respond. We command that people give us some time on stage. We command, our own companies to do things differently, that they look at how they hire, that they look at how they promote, that they look at their maternal or paternal policies, mat leave and paternity leave and healthcare, and the inclusiveness for others, having groups that are focused on LGBTQ issues internally. That when we actually command other people or say, this is an imperative, this is an order, move. do you see what happens? People move, especially if you don't give them an option. But I think that's what's quite interesting, is that we have one single objective, and that single objective is to actually increase the voice of those who don't have an opportunity to share it, to make sure that we are thinking about those that are not served, that we actually design products that serve everybody for everyday living. And it's not a particular market set, it's for everyone. And when we start looking at open banking and open finance, and we're looking at the next wave of what's going on with money, it's very much about designing for the everyday. I mean, let's take a specific product example, and let's go to payments because that's your thing.
Thank you.
What if we actually looked at something called, and I know you like this term, invisible payments? What if payments were just the undercurrent for life? It makes things happen. It's easy, but we don't notice them. But how do we start to design a product that's invisible, so to speak, that actually serves everyone, from the single mother to the young student to the widow or the widower with four kids that now he's got to run a life for 4 children, didn't anticipate it, to a young couple who's just starting out. How do we actually start looking at designing products financially that are inclusive, and how do we bring different voices to that? How are you doing that within Invisible Payments at ACI?
So absolutely. So one of the key things, I think, when you're designing a customer journey, when you're designing, and that's true for payments, but that's true for any service. If your team is very singular, right? Only middle-aged men, only young men, only young women, right? I think it needs to be the other way around as well. Then, without even, I think, bad intentions, there is a skew towards an unconscious bias that designs things in a certain way that are just, very much the customer journey that is specific to that segment. Now, that's fine if you're doing that, but oftentimes, especially in financial services, you want to reach a much broader audience. And so, looking at research, it shows that if you have diverse teams, and that is age diversity, that's gender diversity, that's sexual diversity, cultural diversity, you get a better product. You get a better understanding of what you're designing. And when we take that to payments and inclusivity, my job in life is to make payments electronic, right? My company's been very successful at that over the last 40 years to drive more and more cash out of society, to make payments efficient, and that contributes a great deal to society because efficient payments makes our economy move, and at the end, good economies provide good livelihood for most people. So it's a really important part of it. But what happens when you drive that is, if you don't watch out, you start excluding groups. So one of the things that is happening at the moment is we're getting rid of cash, right? I don't ever have cash. Actually, in Paris, to take a taxi, you sometimes have to get cash because they don't accept. But it's really annoying. I'm like, oh, now I've got euros. What am I going to do with them? Right? But the problem is then what do you do with a beggar? How do you give something to them? What do you do with a street musician? How do you give to them? How do you take care of tips? Do you trust that if a point of sale says you can add a tip, that tip is going to end up at the waiter? So there's a huge opportunity in my mind to design products for that part of the market, and to be able to let people be kind in payments as we drive cash out. There's some great examples there, and those are all about customer journeys that we're designing.
But it also takes a lot of empathy in order to do that, and you can't design anything without empathy. You can't actually do anything without putting yourself in someone else's shoes. There's no understanding without empathy. I think when it comes to increasing diversity, it's some of the things that we can take back into our own organizations. How do we start doing this? How do we, and let's just be honest, the numbers are shite, right? We've actually retracted our, I could use another word, but it's shite. It's absolutely terrible. The numbers are actually retracting. They're shrinking. The number of participants, especially women in senior positions, those that actually have access to real finance and credit, those are all being pulled back. And there's still this lack of women in decision-making positions. but there's also a lack of diversity of people of color in decision-making positions. And when we look at gender and we look at sexual orientation, that's absolutely the case. And of course, a lot of us are living in societies that are also quite discriminatory against other belief systems or other religions. And how often, I mean, I'll be honest, I look around and I go to HSBC and I see one or two sheiks that actually are in positions of decision making, but you know, that's a rare exception, and I'm not quite sure how many people are open about being Muslim or being Buddhist or being Catholic or being atheist. And yet there's an understanding that in Western civilization there's a predominant structure, and we accept this. But there are other needs, there are other ways of managing money in those belief systems. I think of Islamic banking in particular, and how prevalent is Islamic banking actually in the West. And yet I don't want to be charging someone interest when it's actually against their religion. I don't want to be designing products that are penalty against something that they believe in spiritually. There are all sorts of different things, and we're seeing a lack of diversity or a lack of, in part because technology is also exacerbating it. When we look at the fourth industrial revolution, which is being powered by AI, and we look at the companies that are actually designing it, those companies are still predominantly white, straight.
And that's a
Young and
danger when you
middle-aged
think
men.
about AI.
And the
That AI is not going to be neutral if you don't have a diverse team that builds it, right? So you get that, and I think that very much applies for fintech when you look at asking for finance. You know, they found that basically the algorithms will actually, you know, discriminate.
They'll perpetuate the current
And
bias.
that perpetuates that. So I think there is a lot that we can gain. But if I just look back over the last 5 years, and I've been really active in this, if I look at LinkedIn and some of the women that are now in senior positions, right? We had Ann Kearns at the Women in Finance lunch. That there are a lot of women now in senior positions that are speaking out. They're not enough, right? So I think we need to keep pushing to anybody who says, oh, what are you worried about? It's fine. No, it's not fine, right? We still need to push and get it and to go forward and not be ashamed to say, hey, it's not fine. That doesn't mean that I'm not fine. Yeah, but if you don't acknowledge that we still have a problem, then you're blind. But on the other hand, I know that, and again, as part of the network, we've been very inclusive to men as well, right? Because and I applaud the men that have come, right? This is great because
We see one right in the front.
yeah,
There was
yeah,
one right stuck in the back.
And Philippe is
Hello.
in the back. Because it takes all of us to change this, right? The previous panel talked about our children and how they feel about it. I had this wonderful conversation with my sons. I said, it's the 6th of November. I live in the Netherlands. That's officially the day I don't get paid anymore. And they're like, what you mean you don't get paid anymore? I was like, well, look at the pay gap. And oh, what's the pay gap, right? So you start explaining that to your sons and not just to your daughters. And they were absolutely shocked. They're like, what? Yeah, so there's a big responsibility that we have as parents, that we have as men, just as well as women, to drive that diversity and educate and not be ashamed to say there's still a problem. But I can also see very positive progress. Yeah, and
I think we're louder.
yeah, absolutely, and I think this track is a part of being loud, right? And I don't think there's any shame in being loud, but making your point in a respectful way, and being inclusive, because a lot of men want to be part of the solution, yeah. And let's be honest, women sometimes are part of the problem, yeah. So, in my mind, if you're standing up for diversity, one of your key points is to mentor, but also sponsor women. Mm-hmm. So when she's not in the room, don't make a nasty comment. Full stop. Stop yourself from doing that. And actually, if you've got something nice to say, don't hold back, say it. Because men do that for each other. We women should for sure do that for each other as well. Yeah, so let's all be part of solving the diversity problem, and then taking that, because it's not just because diversity is good, but diversity makes financial sense.
Actually, well, it solves problems better, right? I think that's one of the things that we can actually start looking. What are some of the things that we can take back into our individual daily lives that improve? Part of it is, and I use the whole "come closer" because it's an invitation. And I think that's one of the things that it really works in terms of increasing diversity and inclusion, is inviting people in.
Is this an interactive session?
You wanted to talk?
Yes,
you
of
wanna
course,
talk?
go.
Talk. Bring it.
Yeah, I'd just like to challenge you both on something.
Yeah.
Something I've been thinking about for a while. Words matter. We've discussed this, and words are important. And what I'm hearing this evening, and basically is we use the word diversity, and I tend to think that that's almost like a term that's we've relegated ourselves.
It's lost its power.
Yeah, it's lost its power, and it also feels a bit second rate,
Mm-hmm.
as if we're not actually aiming for the real goal, which is equity. And I think what we're aiming for, whether it's culture or gender or race or religion or whatever it is, we're aiming for equity. And therefore things like the 30% Club and different organizations like this that are pushing for diversity, actually we need to change the language. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on this, because the 2 panels ago in this very room, they were talking about a lot about being mothers, as well as businesswomen. And many of the women on the board were saying, the panel were saying, well, I've got sons, and it's really important, etc. But what are we saying to that next generation? What are we telling them? Which words are we using so that, as I said, words matter, so that we're actually aiming for the goal of equity?
Yeah, I think you first need to explain the term equity, right? Especially, if you're not English native, then understanding the difference between equity and treating people equally. Yeah, it's what you're doing with equity is you're giving each person what they need instead of giving everybody the same thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which would be equality. So and that's a very important term. So when we say diversity, yes, I agree, it's lost kind of its power, but people, a lot of people will understand it. I spent quite a bit of time explaining to my children the difference between equality and equity. Yeah, because everybody always, the children always want to know, who do you love best? And I love you all. And I love you all, but I love you the way you need me to love you. So I love every one of you differently, because each of you is different. Yeah, and that explains the difference between being treated equally or being treated how you need to be treated, right? So I agree that is a conversational shift, but I think we need to be very careful when we make our voice loud, talking about percentages and stuff like that. Like, at the end of the day, that is what makes regulators move, because those are easier things to deal with.
I think there's a challenge when we're looking at policy, and you're looking at it from a legislative perspective and a governance perspective, corporate rules and regulations and what the culture is. When you're looking at solving problems in the best way and at putting a team together to actually tackle something, when you're looking at sales teams and connecting with customers of various markets and various segmentations and needs, all of those things require difference so that people can relate, or that people can actually present a different side of the issue. Yeah. I think a lot of it also comes down to representation, seeing examples, seeing that there are people of color running big corporations. I'm thinking of PepsiCo and the CEO. She's a woman, she's a person of color, and that's rare. Unfortunately, that's rare, but now the example exists, right? And having media that represents a number of different types of people. I think one of the things that really is a challenge is that we don't have representation. And a lot of stuff will not change until people see that they can be part of that they are accepted into that particular niche or club because someone else like them is accepted into that particular niche or club. And one of the things that I think is really powerful in terms of what we can do personally is creating those networks or putting together those groups that invite others to be passionate about one particular thing. And for us right now, it's a commonality is we're women and we're faced with an interesting position of not always being listened to or heard, or not always having the opportunity to rise up and in terms of the career ladder as quickly or as easily based on the network that we have, or that we're not paid the same for the same job, or that we are, sort of whatever challenges happen to be, that we're balancing family care and the fact that we make actually 80% of the household decisions financially, but don't necessarily have 80% of the paycheck coming in.
Yeah.
All of those different things, I think we connect on that particular level, but it's finding the community and creating community first and foremost that actually says, I invite you to get closer, I invite you to be part of this, and I want you to look, you don't look like me, but you are exactly like me because we have the same concerns, we have the same passions, and we have the same vision that we want to build. And what we do in terms of taking it back, like the little things that we personally can do, sponsoring other women, actually having a buddy that looks out for you in your corporate experience, if that's it, that you actually have a social connection, that you have a strong communication link with people. And I think social media is fantastic for doing that, but then also recognizing what you put out and how you promote others and giving a voice and a platform for others to do that, and remembering. And, there are some jokes that I've heard. There are a few comments that I've heard on stage over the course of the last 2 days that have diminished women, which really absolutely pissed me off. And not everyone is in a position to cut that. I had one opportunity yesterday where he actually came up to me today. He's like, you called me out on it. You were right. You were right. And I knew halfway through I shouldn't have said it. But I said it immediately after he spoke the words. It was a joke about stewardesses. And I'm like, not now, not 2020, and not because we have a diversity and inclusion problem. You don't get to say that. And I said it on stage. But we all don't have those opportunities. But I think those are the little things that we can do. This whole conversation is one objective, a number of different means. So what can we do individually, collectively, and in our own businesses to open those things up? Mine is really just come closer.
I do have a call to action, and your remark was really inspiring. So if you look at the pay gap and women's careers, right, that you get a lot of discussion about, that's because women work part-time, or, no. When they do those calculations, they factor all of that out, and that's the net pay gap. So then you got to think, where does that come from? It's not because we're less educated. Actually, women are starting to be more educated than men.
Actually, there are more women with degrees than there are
exactly.
men globally, end of story.
So that's not the problem. So when you then factor that in, and I read some really interesting research, there are two key factors to that. One is women tend to speak less in economic numbers. So I think that's a really, really important point when you're trying to sell your product, when you're trying to sell yourself, and you're speaking to people in power who are mostly men. They like that in numbers. So just, give it an economic spin and find a way of doing that. But the other thing is, going back to equality and equity, is maternity leave. Right? When you look at careers and the breaks that you have, and I had 3 children, I took a break 3 times. I've been at the same company for 20 years. They've treated me really well. I now run Europe for them, so I don't mind, right? But if I compare myself and the pay rise I had to my colleagues, that was a challenge, right? And I'm being treated because I need the maternity leave because I'm a mother. What works a lot better is, especially the Nordic countries have done this, is to provide parental leave to both parents and make sure that the fathers are just as forced as the mothers to take the parental leave, because that achieves 2 things. It creates equality in terms of job and career opportunity, and it also forces the men to pick up, the same jobs in terms of the household and care. Right now, I have to confess that my husband is an absolute great guy who does more than his fair share, right? But I'm lucky like that, and not everybody's lucky like that. So I think from my perspective, that's a call to action that we can all take. Back to regulators, back to our companies, Thank you very much for the maternity leave. Now what about a paternity leave? And let's make that equal, because when that becomes equal, you will see that the pay gap will shrink and that the opportunities will become a lot more equal. And that's, you know, a political call to action that's pretty easy to drive, I think, in this day and age.
And if you're ahead of a startup.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, if you're ahead of a startup, it's absolutely, I saw an arm.
I'd like to rebound about equity and equality. Sorry, I want to raise up about the disability because I'm myself in a wheelchair. You mentioned many times the keyword of inclusion. That is very important because, I mean, I'm living in France this year, and this disabled here they feel really, really excluded. There are like 12 million people here in France. 12 million people, which is 15% of the French population, and 500,000 are unemployed, and half of that rate, which means 50%. When it comes to unemployability, it's equal. But once you're a woman and then you're disabled, that's the double penalty. And it's even worse when you even want to dream of getting into the tech. That's a big obstacle. There's a big glass ceiling here in France. So I'd love, I mean, in the future, I'm not a spokesperson of anybody. I mean, I'm here, I'm very privileged to be here. But I'd love in the future to be, to include, by the way, the disability in your discussions, ladies.
Thank you. And it's actually true because not all disabilities are visible either. So this is one of the key things. And that, I think, is one of the bigger challenges, is we are still trying to unpick the prejudice and biases that that are sort of social norms, or they've been condoned, right? My mother's blind. I lived with and you'd be surprised how visually impaired I actually am. I understand that in terms of that small bit, navigating without glasses or navigating with an impairment in terms of vision. If I have rain, I can't walk in the rain without falling. I don't see in front of my face. So I understand one aspect of that. But then there are also, I've done a little bit of work with the FCA in London about mental health and money. And there's also that aspect of disability, and we have to be empathetic to that. Most of us have a community which we see those things going on. So mental health, for example, 1 in 4 people in the room, 25% of us are going through a mental health issue right now. That's just a general statistic. That there's depression, or there's anxiety, or there's a much more severe diagnosis, and that's just the blanket population. And at one point in our lives, all of us will experience a mental health issue. That, for example, is an invisible disability at the moment of vulnerability, right? So how we start thinking about, yes, in terms of policy and funding and how we see that and including it, absolutely. And I think getting around Paris in a wheelchair would be bloody difficult. No wonder you feel excluded from this. My apologies for not actually including disability in the range of things. Thank you for bringing that up. But it's absolutely true. And the funny thing is that when we have this preconceived notion of what someone is able to do because of the visual cues, how they look, what differences that we notice from them, we are missing out on incredible resources and opportunities for their contribution. And I think that starts with us individually. The call to action, I can take back the message of enforced paternity leave. I can take back the message to, I have a teammate in meetings with me who backs me up when I say something, and I back her up when she says something. And I make sure she gets credit for her ideas. And when she's out of the room, I defend her, vice versa. I can go back to my HR and say, we need to absolutely open up and rewrite all of our job descriptions because they don't actually get us the right people. And we're not putting this in language that makes it easy for mothers or parents or students or those that have physical limitations. Recognize that we actually want them. We've excluded them because of the language we've used in our job descriptions. Those little things I can take back, but I also have to start with myself and understand that my preconceived notions are a massive limitation, and I'm an impediment to making a difference if I don't change my point of view, if I don't actually open up, and if I don't include and I don't invite people closer. It's not that I don't invite them, it's that I actually command them to come closer, because that makes me a better person. It also means I can see your eyes, I can see you blinking. I can't see anybody back there. I want to. There's connection. And I think that's the one thing that we can actually do amongst ourselves. We have a community already. There is a women in fintech and a women in finance and women in banking and women in tech. But we can actually make an effort to belong to one of them or to start one if we haven't. We can also make an effort to take the messages that come out of those networks back into our own corporates, our own small businesses, and our own communities. We have an obligation. It starts with us. And the only way that you can drown the world with a tidal wave is one drop at a time. But every single one of those drops pulls in and invites another drop to connect it until the tsunami covers the land. That's what we need. And it starts with us.
On that note, we are the change, right? And I think so. Thank you very much for that.